Welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be reviewing and discussing and reminiscing unashamedly the David Beckham documentary. I think anyone who's watched any moments of my channel knows the strength of feeling that I've got for David Beckham as a footballer at Manchester United. And especially some of the things that he went through with England, Manchester United fan base doing exactly what it always does, rally around him and support him through the things that he was going through. But his documentary has surprised me in a few ways. It's touched on some subjects I really didn't expect him to touch on. It's got some, I think, genuine honesty. I think his wife has come out of it really well, because I think people's perception of his wife probably wasn't a very positive one. Probably because of a lot of the things that the media have painted out, but I think that they explain a lot of the things, particularly the paparazzi. I think the paparazzi stuff with the Beckhams, particularly when this was coming out and probably at its peak very soon after the paparazzi hounded Princess Diana to her death. So I think there was a lot of things going on in the media, with the media, especially with some of the shit rags at the time, that was absolutely abhorrent. And I think it's worth exploring some of what they thoughts on those. What can never be taken away is the absolute undeniable quality footballer that David Beckham was. And I am here for what's probably going to be more than myself making a bit of content sort of celebrating David Beckham. But I'll get into it and I'll give you my thoughts on it. So they set the scene for the Glenn Hoddle disappointment really well. They start talking about how Glenn Hoddle was one of David's favourite players growing up, how they went to go meet him at some book signing thing and he didn't turn up. And we've had Glenn Hoddle on the podcast, and I think he's got an incredible football mind. I think the things he was trying to do with the England team at the time were actually revolutionary. But I think there's probably a fair few flaws that he allows to creep to the surface. He certainly doesn't protect players in the manner Sir Alex Ferguson did publicly. In the aftermath of what happened I think it was in San Etienne, he basically comes out and says, yeah, Beckham's let us down, essentially. And even though some of the phraseology from the journalist that was interviewing Hoddle at the time led him towards that, he didn't reject it. And I think that was wrong. Obviously, he lost his job because of his insane comment that disabled people are paying for their sins in past lives, which is fucking incredibly offensive. So I think Glenn Hoddle, football visionary, complicated bloke, and certainly not one that supported David Beckham through what at the time, and Piers Morgan's got so much to fucking answer for in this, was unprecedented. And when you see some of the way which so-called abuse is leveled at, dealt with, reported, and sort of empathized with in the modern game, and any of us that can remember what David Beckham went through, it's almost hilarious. And that's not to say that anyone should have to go through what Beckham went through, but the way it was treated differently at the time, it is a madness. And Hoddle didn't just criticize Beckham after the World Cup. I forgot the sarong thing. So Beckham's gone on holiday and he's wore a sarong. Would I wear one? No. I'm also not David Beckham. And he was a person that always pushed the boundaries in terms of fashion and style and this, that, and the other. And he's married to a fucking pop star. Like, that's what those kind of people do. Paul Scholes will never be seen dead wearing a sarong. But they're different people. And David Beckham, I think, how many people tell you David was flash when he was on £37.50 a week as a fucking YT at United. Like, that was him. He liked that sort of stuff. He clearly likes that sort of stuff. But Glenn Hoddle criticised him in the build-up to the World Cup, saying he doesn't think his head's on it. Drops him, brings him back into the team. He scores against Colombia. Did he get the assist as well for Owen's goal against Argentina? I think it might have done. And then, obviously, what happens. Incredibly tough relationship there with those two. So, Glenn Hoddle is a big feature of that, and I don't think he helped. And the contrast of what Glenn Hoddle treated him like in the aftermath of that versus what Sir Alex treated him like in the aftermath of that is very telling. And I kind of wish that he'd... I know what they did, and I know why they did it. They're setting up like everybody was against him. It's the redemption arc. Everyone was against him. And Beckham said that a few times in the documentary on Interview, where he said everyone was against him. And I felt as a United fan at the time who wasn't against him, and the United fan base as a whole was not against him, that was a little bit disappointing to hear that he didn't really acknowledge. He sort of said the club was behind me, but I think the way United fans rallied round him didn't really... The documentary didn't really reflect the history for me in that sense. And I understand what they was trying to paint a narrative, but I lived through it and I felt different. You know, immediately rallied round Beckham because, you know, the game was a draw when he went off. The game ended a draw. Couple players missed penalties, but it's Beckham's fault we lost. The math ain't mathing, mate. Was he stupid? Yeah. But it was soft. I mean, actually, Simeone's involvement in documentary was fascinating and really good to get his perspective of that. And obviously, like the journey David went on from... I mean, that it's my favourite season of all time in '99. But the performances that he put in some of those games, and just if you look at the game against Inter, people were talking about how Beckham wasn't really having it until he pulled out the two crosses that Dwight York put away. But look at all the other crosses that they show him making that people are getting on the end of and not scoring. Like, he isn't like Ashley Young in it, 1 out of fucking 13 crosses. He put in like, I'm pretty sure it was like 7 for 8 in that night. Unbelievable level of accuracy from a cross. Point number 2, probably the price of fame. So following on from point 1, but his relationship with Victoria was one I didn't really understand why they needed to keep it a secret. But they obviously had to keep it a secret. And then they're interviewing the 2 paparazzi at Hotel Football, talking about them stalking him and all the rest of it. And it's savage, honestly. Like, paparazzi is who's out here paying for those? How are newspapers profiting from getting photographs of people out in public candidly? And I understand it's perfectly legal to take photographs of people in public, but when you see some of the stuff that they were going through when it comes to like when Brooklyn was born and how they're they're chasing around, and at the time as a couple they're going through kidnap threats. Like, it's an insane thing to think about, that you've got to think about your safety. And Beckham says his first thought when Brooklyn was born is, how am I going to look after him? You got to remember, Brooklyn's born in the middle of the 98-99 season with everything that's going on in David Beckham's life at the moment. He's currently the best player on earth. He's less than 12 months out from everything that's just happened in the World Cup. And then you've got these paparazzi that are just following him around all the time, trying to get pictures of him and his wife, him and his son. Absolutely mental. You know, the kidnap threats against your kids must be just so hard to deal with. On top of the vilification and all the rest of that sort of stuff that you're getting, just as a matter of course of playing for United. Point 3, it does delve into his relationships. I think he's got a great relationship with his dad. It's an interesting relationship because some people will think it's harsh. I think they're being overly soft. I think putting standards on your kids and asking them to meet the standards isn't overly harsh. And I think obviously Ted Beckham raised one of the best footballers anyone's ever seen. So I think however he chose to educate Beckham in football was successful. I don't think you can say anything else. David worked at it. He was instilled with a work ethic that wanted to be successful. So fair play to that. But it's really interesting listening to some of the relationships, listening to his mum talk, listening to his dad talk. I really enjoyed listening to those. And it's good listening to Sir Alex. And it's not propaganda. They delve into some of the relationships and controversies with Sir Alex Ferguson. The boot incident especially plays a real key role in it. And Beckham admitting that, you know, he's wanted to punch Sir Alex Ferguson. And being in dressing rooms, I understand how those confrontations happen. I was talking to Janine about it this morning, and she was like, you can't speak to each other like that in a dressing room. I'm like, yeah, that's how you speak to each other in a dressing room. And that dressing room, that United dressing room in 2003, you're talking Roy Keane's in there, Ryan Giggs, Paul Scholes, Rio would have been in there, Beckham, Neville. There's a lot of winners in that dressing room, and a lot of people who aren't shy about what they want to say. And I think they're discussing like who's at fault for conceding a goal, and Beckham saying watch the video, and he's like, I don't need the fucking video, I've got my eyes. And it's very easy to see how he comes and goes, oh fuck off. Fergie boots a boot, it ends up sailing it in David in the eye. Albert Morgan's take on it as a kit man, sort of accusing Beckham of hamming it up for the cameras, is very interesting when you consider that it's David Beckham that's put this documentary out there. It'd been very easy for David Beckham not to include that part of the documentary. And it's interesting how you get Fergie's perspective on this, David Beckham's perspective on this. You get the kit man kind of going, well, I'm not going to talk about that there. And by not talking about it, very much painting some accusations in there. You see Roberto Carlos in the mix there, Figo talking. Some really, really nice cameos, and obviously being pretty close to Rio and seeing Rio's level of involvement in all of these major incidents was really, really funny. And it's Rio being who he is off camera, weirdly as well. Like sweary, very relaxed. I thought Rio was really much himself, but Rio was there. People forget Rio was on the bench in the Argentina game, but then he plays for West Ham in the first game back. Obviously, the first United game back. Like, I've never spoken to him what the atmosphere was like then, but I will be doing this week. And then obviously he's on the pitch for the goal against Greece, the ultimate redemption arc. He's in the changing room when Fergie's volleying a boot at him, and you think, fucking hell, he was actually here for so many of these incidents. Obviously, a part of the demolition that we got at the hands of R9 and Real Madrid. But yeah, some really interesting relationships in there. And it does, I think, being someone that's watched the shit out of The Last Dance, I think it does kind of follow that redemption arc a little bit, with also being honest and opening up to some of the controversies. I mean, he talks about, well, let's talk about on this one. So the Madrid and US adventures, let's call that number 4, right? So when Beckham leaves United, he hears about it by Barcelona's bid being accepted. And weeks before, he's spoken to Zidane on the pitch and said, I'll never leave United, kind of thing. After Zidane supposedly asked him if he'd ever play for Real Madrid. He sees that United have accepted a bid from Barcelona, so he rings the club up and goes, what the fuck's going on? Can I speak to the manager? And the club saying, no. That's crazy. That's crazy. And then he comes out with, okay, well, if I'm leaving the club, then I want to go to a club I want to go to, and I want to play for Real Madrid. But really interesting, one of the points where he says he never spoke to the manager about it, and actually in hindsight he's glad he didn't, because he thinks that it'd have broke his heart if he'd have spoke to Sir Alex and Sir Alex had have said to him, I don't want you anymore. Because he does, like, there's such a father figure thing that gets built up over the first couple of episodes that I can see, if he brings that up, he's going to absolutely fucking decimate him. And while in Madrid, they do touch on the affair he had whilst in Madrid, and very, very interesting seeing Victoria discuss that on camera and talk about how hard that was for her. This is not a North Korea Beckham propaganda puff piece. It is very much something that is quite an honest documentary, and I'm sure there's probably inconsistencies in there still, but it comes across as very authentic. And for that reason, I think it'll stand the test of time, because it does delve into a lot of stuff that I genuinely didn't expect. I expected this to be like a highlight reel of David Beckham and how amazing he is. And actually, it does show some of the vulnerabilities and flaws and things like that in the mix as well. Talks about, obviously, the fact that he goes to LA Galaxy, how scrutinized that is. But with 10 years nearly 20 years of hindsight now, and you go back and see what David Beckham did going to LA actually made football in the MLS in America stick. He really led the revolution for players starting to go over there. And at first it was a bit of a retirement home, but the tide has started to shift, and MLS has become quite a serious competition. It's obviously behind European competition, but he did something Pele couldn't do. Now, maybe the time was right in America, but Beckham had a huge part in that. I know obviously he's a franchise owner or a club owner in LA with Inter Miami, and has got Messi playing for him. Like, his career on and off the pitch is absolutely bananas. And then the fifth one, it kind of ends on a bit of a high. Charts his venture with Inter Miami. Has got some really good moments there with his family. There's even a little bit of touching on his beekeeping hobby that he's got. What it doesn't do is it doesn't really delve into anything about Qatar. There was a lot of criticism that he faced for his involvement in promotion of the World Cup. Doesn't really touch on that. He does have Capello actually talking about that move to America. Gary Neville's in it, and he's just 100% authentically Gary Neville all the way through it. Roy Keane telling a story about Beckham buying a fucking pen. A flash pen. Roberto Carlos touching on the popularity of Beckham across Japan and how just mind-blowing it was with him. There's some really, really interesting characters across it, and it's a genuinely good documentary. If you're a United fan of a certain vintage like me, I think that's that, yeah. Bill says the only thing missing was whether he cheated on Posh. They spoke about the fallout, but not whether he'd been insider. Right, well, Bill, you're there to take your own view on that, but I think the fact that it's in the fucking documentary tells you, doesn't it? Estadio says Albert Morgan was great. Not going to talk about it, then talks about it. Witterbird says, nice to see Kath in the documentary. The legend that is Kath. I wonder if Rio can get her on a podcast, because what a fucking podcast that would be, eh? Brian says, imagine if Beck's never lost United. Here's the thing, right? I think David Beckham, in his mind, probably thought he was going to do what Giggs and Scholes and Gary Neville did, which is retire at Manchester United. I think that was the case, but I think once he left United, I think that opened up the world. And just look who he played for. Yes, he went and played for LA Galaxy, but the guy had over 100 caps for England. I think, was it one of the most as captain as well, by the way? Played for Paris Saint-Germain, played for Real Madrid, played for AC Milan. I mean, what a career. Notch says, has it changed my outlook in any way about wanting to interview him? I would like to interview him if I thought it would be a genuine interview. And yeah, maybe that interview is, or maybe that documentary, sorry, gives the potential that actually maybe there is a real interview to be had with David Beckham. Because he does open up on a lot of stuff there that he didn't. And if I did interview him, would I ask him first and foremost about Qatar? No, because I would like to share some of my favourite ever footballing memories with a guy that produced them. So journalistically, probably should ask him about the more current event type stuff. But as a pure fan, which is what I am, I'm going to talk to him about some of the games and some of the moments that he provided us with. LKN says, was surprised it didn't show more of Class of 92 and early years in the Prem. That might have been a licensing issue. It might have been a cost issue for having to obtain all that sort of footage. Witterbird says, Steve, player or manager you'd like to see in a documentary? It depends on the access. Because there's been a lot of documentaries about people that haven't had access. I'd particularly like a very in-depth Johan Cruyff one. Um, like a real big production Amazon or Netflix one on Cruyff. Ronaldinho would be fascinating because what an interesting character he would be. R9, again, fascinating. My Mount Rushmore of footballers, Cantona, Beckham, R9, in terms of people I would love to have football conversations with. They were the three players that I really fell in love with watching play football. Outside of that, ultimate respect. Put them in my top tier of footballers: Paul Scholes, Roy Keane, Jaap Stam, Ruud van Nistelrooy, Andy Cole, the likes of Maldini, Ramos. There's loads of players I've enjoyed watching over the years. Brian Casey, Keane, or Bobby Charlton. Bobby Charlton with a really good, well-produced documentary could be brilliant. Did I not see the overlap program with Beckham in it? No, I didn't, and I only saw a clip of that recently, last night actually, and I was like, oh shit, yeah, let me have a look at that. Seedorf, yeah, Seedorf for sure. Any current players? Like, here's the thing, right? I don't think Robbo's documentary did it justice. Robbo's documentary felt rushed. And I'd like to see an actual, genuine deep dive on Robbo with an explanation about why he was so good. And I think there's a lot of ways you could do. You could do that. I think there's a better way to do a Gaza one. Maybe there's some fascinating people. Like Cantona's probably got a really good documentary in him about his career because it's fucking not like he retired before he came to England. Like he was like, yeah, I'm done. Fuck this shit. And then obviously it turns around and it becomes the Eric Cantona that made a lot of us fall in love with football. Farouk says Rooney. Yeah, Rooney's had one recently, but it was shit. Really, when you think about the impact Wayne Rooney had as a footballer, his documentary is shit, isn't it? Like there's a lot of good players that probably should have had better representation in their documentaries about him. Crunch Time says Beckham was my hero growing up. I will always have massive respect for him as a player and commercial icon. He opened the door to the commercial side of being a professional footballer. I'm not sure that's entirely accurate, to be honest, because there was big old sponsorships kicking about way before Beckham. I know they sort of seemed to make it like he was going to be doing these big commercial things, but they did exist before that. They did. I mean, Ryan Giggs had a Reebok deal before Beckham had his Adidas deal. Like, I can remember that. And I'm sure there's more. Like, older people, I'm sure, could... I bet Robbo had some. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's... I think they hammed that up a little bit, to be honest. I'm going to be honest with you. Whitbird says Robbo had a big denim sponsor. Brilliant. Keegan did, says Notch. There you go. Do you know what I mean? There's tons of people with that. TDF says Beckham tried doing what Jordan did with Adidas. Not quite, because obviously they never give him his own boot, like aside from, like it was never the Beckham, was it, in the way that Jordan was. But yeah. Jockey says Van der Sar. Brian says Best was probably the first icon outside of football. Yeah, I mean, Jesus Christ. Yeah, look at some of the sponsorships George Best has or had. Absolutely. Gibbo says Duncan Edwards, my granddad's favourite player, Steve. I've read the book you recommended years ago called The Greatest. It's a very, 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 very good book. Very good book. So yeah, like, fascinating. I saw someone earlier, I read it and then forgot the name, but someone said, what would have happened to Ronaldo if Beckham would have stayed? Maybe. So I was talking, I've spoken about this quite a lot actually, because I watch weird games and I watch them in depth and I always try and reevaluate what my thoughts were on them at the time. And I did ask Rio a few years ago, was Sir Alex, when he went to 4-5-1 with Veron in the middle, and it was Beckham and Giggs with a winger still, and you had Veron, Scholes and Keane in midfield, and it didn't work. This is with Ruud as the striker. And I said, was Sir Alex trying to make 4-3-3 happen? And Rio said no, he was trying to make 4-4-2 still happen with Scholes as the 10. I was like, oh, okay. Because the way I saw what was happening with 4-5-1, in hindsight, didn't see this at the time. I thought we're playing 4-5-1 and this is shit, but at the time, I knew he wanted the extra control in midfield. And I always wondered, did he try to make 4-3-3 happen? Was he visionary enough that he saw 4-3-3 coming down the pipe and thought this is how football was going to go for the 2000s? But when you look back at 1999, the final, last 10 minutes, Solskjaer on the right, Sheringham and York as a forward three, Beckham on the right side as a number 8 in midfield, Giggs on the left side as a number 8 in midfield with Nicky Butt as a 6. That is how we've played the last 10 minutes of the final in Champions League final 1999. And I wonder, was that a bit of a precursor for 4-3-3? Because it worked. And what would happen with David Beckham? Well, maybe you do go 4-3-3. You couldn't do 4-3-3 with Beckham and Giggs as wingers because they were midfielders. You needed the more dynamic inverted winger. Maybe you go to 4-3-3 with Beckham playing as an 8 rather than as an out-and-out winger, and you still bring Ronaldo in. And Ronaldo, Rooney, Rude operate, Rooney and Ronaldo are your wide forwards with Rude down the middle, and then you have a midfield that might have been Beckham, Varane, Keane, Scholes, Butt, etc., playing down the middle of the pitch. Christian says, watching these old clips of United brings a tear to my eye. Does it make you feel the same way? It just shows you what is what the level was, and we were fucking good. We were fucking good. As good as it's been, I think. LKN says Glenn Hoddle's defo hiding after this doc. He doesn't come out of it, does he? Sal says Queiroz bit was wild. Him coming in, pissing off Neville, Keane, Becks, becoming Madrid manager when Becks moves there. Yeah, I mean, Queiroz doesn't actually come out great in anyone's documentary. People recognise how good he was as a coach, but like Keane seeing his arse with him, a few people really saw their arse with him. Craig says, would Rio ever get Keane on Vibe with 5? I think there's a bit of an issue with the Sky, BT/TNT sort of stuff, I think. Antonis, how do you think Fergie would have viewed Rashford as a player if he had him? Do you think he would have been rated or as one of the best or as a squad member? I think there's I think there's a bit of a fucking agenda against Rashford at the moment. I don't know why. He's not playing well, right? No one's sitting here saying he's playing well. And I see loads of people say, why are you defending him? Like, I'm not defending him, but I'm also not just going to fucking hammer him either because he's a United player. If he makes the same mistakes, yes, they'll be brought up, but, this is a guy that scored 30 goals for us last season, and people are forgetting that far too quickly, in my opinion. Alex says, only watched the first episode, but that team in 1997 was immense. Definitely some trouser tingles watching those clips. Steve says, Sky BT issues we're getting keen on. Is Vive with 5 funded by BT? No, but Rio is very much a BT pundit and Keane is very much a Sky pundit. I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I think that's one of the dramas, as far as I know. Jockey says, just watched your recent show with Ash. Does Ash really believe in aliens? Yep, Ash texted me this morning with a clip of some aliens that was in the mirror. It's 100% true story. I think he's bang into that. But anyway, I am going to wrap it up. Please give me your thoughts on the Beckham documentary. Give it a rating out of 10 in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Laters. Hey, thank you for watching the video. If you are new around these parts, then don't forget to subscribe. My channel is proudly supported by my community on Patreon. If you'd like to get a little bit of extra content, a Discord group, meetups, five-a-side games, weekly podcasts, behind the scenes, and even an occasional bit of transfer news as and when I get it, then for the price of a pint, you can show your appreciation for the content that we make and get some goodies for doing so as well. Check the link in the description or click the button right here. You'll also find all of my socials here too if you want to follow me on any of those platforms. Nice one.